Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. Now the lesson to be learned is an imperialistic one, an expansivist one, a very non-isolationist one. There's a scene where Daryl's escaping the Savior's colony where he was basically kidnapped and taken hostage. And he comes across this one guy who's one of the saviors, one of the marauders, but he's kind of a cowardly marauder. So he's trying to tell Daryl, look, if you let me go, I'm not going to say nothing. You can just leave. I won't chase you. I won't alert the guards, whatever. But Daryl says something right after he beats him to a pulp with some metal rod. He says, it's not about survival anymore, it's about getting it all. Now, one could easily just glance over that and not read too deep in it all, but really it was the only philosophical moment of the entire episode. But I think it's a very crucial thesis, and I call it a thesis because I don't think it's written in stone. Basically, it's the philosophy that life is virulent, life is expansive, that as human beings, it would seem anyways that we can't find a balance with nature, that we're always trying to grow and conquer and expand our territory, and it's almost as if you can't remain stagnant, that if you do, you're either moving forward or you're moving backwards. It's very hard to just maintain and isolate yourself and wall yourself in like they did in Alexandria. Now they're starting to realize that you can't just defend yourself, that you have to either be the hunted or the hunter. If you remember, the hunt and hunted quote was actually from the season 5 with the cannibals in Terminus. So the crew is starting to realize that they can't just hunker down, and this is an important prepper lesson, I think, and it's one that I have been reluctant to accept. Hibernian's son, Irish, many of you know Irish, has always pushed this view that you have to be of the expansive mindset, that you need to be out there in the space, as he so eloquently calls it, unfolding your empire onto the world, or else you're at risk of being on the defensive. And once you're on the defensive, basically you can't grow, you're going to lose wars by attrition, you're not going to be able to evolve and project your influence onto the world and essentially survive, because it isn't about survival. It really is about growth. It's not just about hanging on. And this is why that quote from Daryl was so profound, is that it's not just about sitting in a basement with a shotgun trained on the door with a bunch of food canisters that you're sitting on waiting for yourself to die. It's not about that. There's countless movies like The Dawn of the Dead where they're all in the shopping mall and they go on this big gluttonous consumerist spree where they overindulge in the shopping mall, and they all ask themselves, like, what the hell's the point of this? We're just sitting ducks. Eventually, something's going to happen. Are we going to just wait for something to happen, or are we going to expand outwards? I used to play real-time strategy games, and I was a camper. If you don't know what a camper is, it's somebody who just builds up their base, builds up their fortifications, and turtles in and builds up this massive fortification so that the enemy expends all their main resources trying to invade you, and then once they're pretty much weak and they've weakened themselves, you go in afterwards and you destroy them. That may be a strategy that could work in some cases. You're going to expend much more military resources on the offensive than on the defensive, probably like a 2-to-1 ratio, really. So that is a potential strategy, but it's not you can't grow like that. You can't grow by just turtling in. And ultimately, at the end of the day, he who rules the space rules the world. And they're realizing this now. They're not safe within the walls of Alexandria. They're not safe just minding their own business, because some guy like Negan is going to fill the power vacuum. And I can guarantee if this Walking Dead show goes on long enough, you're going to see it move up above the regional scale and move on to the statewide or nationwide scale, where you're going to have conquerors on a scale of a national level or something like that. Who knows, maybe they'll bring back the military at some point in season 10 or 11. Maybe that's where it'll go, to the United States government reemergence or something like that. Some much larger parasitic force. And it really boils down to what you believe. I mean, if you believe that we are a imperialistic species and you believe in the capitalist model of growth, that you need either infinite growth or basically you have economic decline, you have economic contraction. If you're one of the people who believe that we can't just stay at a balance with nature and that we constantly need to be growing, then the philosophy put forward in this show is probably one akin to your beliefs. If, on the other hand, you do believe that we can live in balance with nature and we don't have to be in this mindset where we're constantly trying to extend and expand and empower ourselves even more and make ourselves bigger and bigger and bigger, just like a virus, just like a cancer cell. It really is a cancerous perspective to believe that in a finite world, we would have to grow infinitely. At some point, somebody's going to rule the earth. Somebody's going to rule the planet. And really, that's what history has been. It's been a progression of events up until now when we have this global body. And that really is the last hurdle for someone. It's the last power vacuum. It's the global, who is going to control the world. Because at some point, hundreds and hundreds of years from now, the way that technology is moving, it's inevitable that there is going to be one global superpower. The question is, who's it going to be? And then, of course, after that, maybe we go interplanetary. Who knows? If we're still here when that happens, of course. Now, the idealist within me would like to think that we don't have to be out there conquering others before they conquer us. And that's really what this boils down to. So it becomes an ethical dilemma. Do you go out and conquer other colonies before they conquer you? I'm sure if we were ever faced with a scenario like this, the answers would become pretty apparent what we had to do. The question's going to come in the form of how proactive are you going to be? Because you know that there is going to be a power vacuum there. If society collapsed tomorrow, whether it's the street next to you or the town next to you or the state next to you, all of those are power vacuums waiting to be filled by somebody. Is it going to be a bad guy? Is it going to be a good guy? Now, because we all are the greatest in our own minds, as I've heard it said before, it's very likely that many would say that, well, I would rather myself be in charge than somebody else because I have the capacity to be more ethical or moral. But maybe there's assholes out there who are totally aware that they would be ruthless dictators and they have no problem with that. There's a lot of people out there like that who have absolutely no problem, exploiting and extorting people, like Negan would. Many of them are probably fairly compliant with the rule of law right now because they're too smart to want to waste their life in jail. But if there was no rule of law, they might be out there raping and pillaging. Who knows? And if you were to take on this colonialist mindset, don't you think that you would inevitably devolve in your morality no matter how hard you tried to not be a control freak? I think that everybody would progressively become more ruthless in their method. You would have to be, to a point where perhaps you were totally objectivist and detached from your emotions and just doing whatever you had to do to remain on top. And that might seem quite cutthroat and ruthless to your subjects, but you may have a rational explanation for that as the benevolent dictator, knowing that, well, if not me, it's going to be somebody else, and it might be somebody who's far more sadistic in their methods. I recently moved into a middle management position, and I can already see the change in my purview of the battlefield, in the sense that I am now becoming more and more sympathetic to seeing things from that level. I'm becoming less and less sympathetic to the grievances of the front line. Not because my values have changed necessarily, just because I'm seeing things from another perspective. It's like the general and the private. The private soldier has their one little sliver that they see of the battlefield. That's why they're called a private. They're by themselves. The general sees everything. He sees generally the entire battlefield. So a strategic move for him might mean the death of the private and vice versa. Some might say that Daryl's perspective is what destroyed the world, and are they now just doing it all over again? Is this apocalyptic scenario a chance for something new to emerge, for a new standard of balance to emerge amongst people, amongst communities, where we're no longer evolving by the mechanism of natural selection and man-made artificial selection that has emerged now in these urban hives that we've created, where it's not so much that we're being chased by lions and hyenas, but we're being chased by ourselves, the rat race, in order to improve ourselves. That's artificial selection. Social Darwinism, perhaps. I know that's something different, but you know what I'm saying. Would a post-apocalyptic scenario or a reset, in order to be meaningful, have to be different? Would Daryl's philosophy would it be an idiotic repeat of the last several thousand years? People always talk about we need the reset. Well, what happens when we do the reset? Are we just rebooting the same old program over again? Do we really want to be technologically thrust back to a medieval level only to have to do it all over again? Do we really want to be knocked down the evolutionary tree back to the Stone Age only to emerge again and have the same problems decades, if not hundreds, thousands of years from now? Something to consider anyways, guys. Let me know what you think in the comments. Thanks for watching. Canadian Prepper out.